Hello, hi everyone. My name is Claudia González. I come from Cuba, where I know Tania. Should I name it? So it's okay? It's better? Okay. I am a researcher at the Observatory of Cultural Rights. I have a PhD on cultural studies from the Justus Liebig Universität in Gießen. That's clean. So, first of all, I want to thank Tania Bruguera and her team from Institute of Artivism, Hannah Arendt, which I know from Havana, of course, for inviting me to take part of this wonderful project, to be here today with all of you, presenting also the great, great work of Cuban artists who doesn't only create art, but they do that in a very hostile environment, with violence, with censorship, and with coercion. So what I want to talk about today is a little bit about that. My doctoral dissertation, my PhD thesis, is also about Hannah Arendt and about her politics on totalitarianism, and this links very good with INSTAR work. Please excuse that I'm going to read the text because I am not very fluent in English. I think that's going to be probably the better way to do that, and afterwards we can to debate or discuss a little bit like German says with Hände und Füßen, but we are going to have also help with the translation. Revolutionary or degenerated art, cultural policies in authoritarian systems. It is a universal norm that artistic freedom as a fundamental right is explicitly protected by Constitution within the democratic spectrum. Agreements among regulating institutions establish guarantees for creation without censorship or intimidation and ensure the right for artistic work to be supported, distributed, and remunerated. They also guarantee the rights to freedom of movement and association, the protection of social and economic rights, and the right to participate in cultural life. According to the Convention on the Protection and Promotion of the Diversity of Cultural Expression, artistic freedom is, and I quote, the freedom to imagine, create, and distribute diverse cultural expressions free of government censorship, political interference, or the pressure of non-state actors. It includes the right of all citizens to access this work and is essential for the well-being of every society. In addition, it stipulates that cultural diversity can be protected and promoted only if human rights and fundamental freedoms, such as freedom of expression, information, and communication, as well as the ability of people to have access to various cultural expressions, are guaranteed. However, this agreement do not offer practical guarantees. The cultural administration of Russia and China, as well as the spread of their form of authoritarianism in Latin America countries, have changed the artistic landscape and the political imaginary of their respective societies with profound implications in the public spheres and civil society. Supportive alliances, both pragmatic and symbolic, among these governments are important conduits for the dissemination and transfer of authoritarian norms, values, and information. As a consequence, cultural policies in countries with authoritarian tendencies, such as Cuba, Venezuela, and Nicaragua, have conferred and legitimized official narrative and aesthetics, while drastically restricting the creative and also civic freedoms of artists and intellectuals. We can identify the nature of cultural governance as an object of domination based on its political logics and the social conditions in which it operates. Cultural politics as discretionary governance is a systematic practice carried out by autocratic administrations. Its main legitimation mechanism lie in the instrumentalization of public space as a means to establish a dominant historical and cultural narrative. The monolithic politicizations of identity, militancy, and nationalist ideology, the struggle of an emerging collective body of social and cultural pluralism, forms of exploitation based on state monopolies, such as neopatrimonialism and state interventionism, marked by process of repression, coercion, criminalization, and stigmatization. Several organizations and observatories keep a record of this practice and annually report violation of artistic freedom in Latin America, such as the Center of Latin America's Opening and Development, so CADAL, Free Muse, PEN International, Article 19, Index of Censorship, Martin Roth Initiative, the Center for Applied Human Rights, International Cities of Refugee Networks, and so on. This reports one of signs of the spread of authoritarian legislation from governments such as Russia, China, Syria, to other regions. A specific element of common practice that they denounce is the articulation of criminal acts, considering digital sovereignty as an extension of territory, a claim that several analysts see as exercise in censorship and digital authoritarianism. For example, covering broader legal spheres, laws such as Decree Law number 349 in Cuba, or the law against hate in Venezuela, or the foreign agents registration law in Nicaragua, share common elements with other cybersecurity laws in autocratic governments like in China or Russia, for example. Most of these laws have been temporarily approved. They interpret critical expressions as exercise in content of national values. They regulate civic actions around consubstantial freedoms, among other forms of coercion in the face of uncomfortable actions, as in dissidents. Cultural governance in authoritarian context propose political logics that transform culture from an anthropological, symbolic, and ritual object into an administrable political object. In media discourse, ideas of nation and cultural sovereignty over politicize culture to the point of erasing civic artistic agency and replacing it with process that has been called the eclipse or erosion of state sovereignty. A preference for the instrumentalization of culture governmentalizes it to shape repertories and differentiate behaviors beyond its common arena. For example, within the assertions of popular culture, the orientation of society's majority regarding the accessibility of any cultural product and of mass communication has been based on the propagandistic function of national culture. What is declared popular, revolutionary, or official culture is understood as having access to the media, festivals, funds, and concessions. Through this, see? Can you hear me? Nene? Oh. It's back. Tanya? I think, yeah. We are back. Yeah, we are back. No. Ahora sí. Jetzt funktioniert. Yeah. Yeah? You can hear me. Okay. So, going on, through this resource, an individual's Weltanschauung is also formed within a society that no longer must distinguish. I think I can. So it's not good. Okay. In the meanwhile, it's nice when you visit here the presentation. Ya, sí. En línea debe sentir, sí, pero. Yeah? Yeah, we are back. So, going a little bit back, what is declared popular, revolutionary, or official culture is understood as having access to all governmental resource. Through this resource, this individual Weltanschauung, we think of the world, is also formed within a society that no longer must distinguish only between legal and illegal restrictions, but also among guidelines and norms of what is correct and recommended versus what is not. No? That is this philosophy of Hannah Arendt also. Precisely from the perspective of the collective subconscious, cultural politics in this context includes myriad homogenizing engineering that implies antagonistic reconfiguration, including a new linguistic and politics of memory. Above all, in authoritarian context, with the tradition of revolutionary movements, these components situate social behavior under an intense normative system of considerable influence on the collective subconscious. Therefore, it is vital to understand cultural governance as an intersection between the official, so instituting imaginary, and the social imaginary, such as instituted, so the based. Governance patterns coexist at this intersection, where autocracy's legality, legitimation, and perpetuation are established. From a bureaucratic perspective, where authoritarian regimes impose greater restrictions, official culture retains and even strengthens its privileged political and social positions in what the Hungarian writer Anastasi described in the case of late socialism as a master-slave relationship. In this analogy, censorship doesn't occur then by a state intervention, but by the politicization of a new cultural aesthetic, by the instrumentalization of the intelligentsia, where official artists also operate as bureaucrats and curators, among other circumstances and positions that conspire to destroy the basis of autonomous artistic activity. This governance creates a particular political logic of command, obedience, opposition, and subversion, where the greatest effect is their camouflaging, in this case cultural, and the elimination of true agency. Cultural governance under authoritarianism thus seems to be based on the arbitration between coercion and consent, where ambiguity upholds the myth of the administration without actually revealing the homogeneous and rapacious power block. The role of the legalistic bureaucracy in the cultural arena, where the separation of constituent, legislative, and judicial powers is in the hands of the executive, fulfills an essential function as a constitutionally privileged and functionally specialized instrument to become arbitrators of rules and procedures, and extend legal consequence regardless of the possible unconstitutionality of the laws implemented. Correspondingly, the legislative corpus of authoritarian system reveals a strong tendency towards the ad hoc and circumstantial coercion when confronting the emergences of uncomfortable narrative. In turn, description of permitted civic and artistic activities do not present complementary regulations beyond the classification of those that are understood as crimes within the penal code. Such dispersion of the bureaucratic apparatus has direct consequence on the civic body, and structural order. It facilitates the application of direct measures free from mechanisms of public deliberation, while avoiding the emergence of individual or group grassroots autonomies capable of articulating other subjectivities beyond the official worldview. Common elements emerge in the worldview of these cultural policies: a discourse with populist characteristics that appeals to the nationalist sentiments and the defense of sovereignty, and which criminalize cultural diversity that might offer alternative to or critiques of the official message. In the last 4 years, most autocracies have put great emphasis on stigmatization and social sanctions, as well as on the dynamics of silencing, re-victimization, deconstruction, and demobilization. Other common elements are the censorship or condemnation of artistic expressions considered offensive or vulgar towards national symbols and other official emblems. The argument of incitement to hatred is also used in the face of specific interpellations, frequently linked to the objective of a social uprising, public violence, and the glorification of the enemy. In general, cultural policy has turned towards themes of defense and territorial security, turning the political system into a personal security state. These definitions are, in legal language, vague enough to broaden what is considered a violation in favor of restrictive politics. The discretionary application of measures to restrict artistic freedoms aligned with international human rights regulations more generally, as both ideological and artistic persecution overlap in a biased interpretation where both are understood as political dissidents. In particular, support for arguing for the protection of national security and sovereignty has been wielded by several anti-terrorist laws that criminalize the influence of foreign governments on national culture. In this latter sense, art has been considered a destabilizing element paid for by enemy powers. In the last 10 years, non-democratic countries have used the fight against terrorism to advance penalties against defaming or insulting figures and symbols that are representative of the government. The criminal codes of Saudi Arabia, Rwanda, Iran, Turkey criminalize with those sentences the making or reproduction of memes or posts on social networks that mock, provoke, or disturb public orders and morals. China, Turkmenistan, and also Cuba have stigmatized and censored insipid, vulgar, and obscene cultural expressions in the mass media. The vast legal writing of activities that violate the provisions that regulate the normal development of our society in cultural matters aggravates the possibility that culture is administered from a dystopian perspective for artists, condemned by what the curators understand according to the narrative of their political system. Cuba, Venezuela, and Nicaragua have similar laws regarding cyber crimes as criminal offenses. In July 2019, the Cuban government approved Decree Law 317 that sought to increase technological sovereignty to benefit society, the economy, national security, and defense, and to counteract cybernetic aggressions, while condemning the dissemination through public data transmission networks of information contrary to social interests, morals, good customs, and the integrity of people. In October 2020, the Nicaraguan National Assembly approved the Special Cybercrimes Law. The criminal procedure penalized with 2 to 4 years in prison spreading fake news and calls to hate and chaos in the media. Both laws have been considered gag laws, aimed at criminalizing and repressing any exercising of criticism or political demands in public space. In August 2021, ¿hay un problema tecnológico? ¿Ya? Okay. Yeah, perfect. So going back, in August 2021, Decree Law 35 came into force in Cuba with the aim of defending the achievement made by the socialist state by penalizing ethical and social damage or incidents of aggression, among other activities that the regulations characterize as social subversion. In practice, se fue. Ya regresó. Oh, then go. That is also funny. Yeah? So, in practice, this regulation seriously coerces freedom of expression on digital platforms by legally backing up retaliation against posts on social networks such as Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or even in WhatsApp groups. In general, these provisions have similar features. They enter into force on a discretionary basis without further discussion nor public monitoring. They are also more broadly open to interpretation, control, and action for the government benefit. Many of these measures have been announced on social networks with various consequences. The destruction of the public obligation for state accountability, the normalization of a lack of consultation and media decision-making as emblematic of state policies, the communication and promotion of a presidential monologue as exemplified by Nicolás Maduro, Daniel Ortega, or Miguel Díaz-Canel. In addition, there is a pattern of harassment of artists in digital spaces that includes violent threats and intimidation on platforms such as Facebook and Twitter. According to the Cybertrope Report 2019 of the Oxford Internet Institute, Cuba and Venezuela are among the countries with the highest incidence of cyber armies. Fake government profiles dedicated to denigrating and threatening the accounts of activists and independent journalists in order to undermine unfavorable opinions. The official narrative's capacity for improvisation and positing in cultural administration continues to be so dominant that despite expansive legal regulations and their accompanying repressive legitimation, the Latin America autocracies have monopolized a conciliatory language, dichotomizing critical expression as exercise of hatred. In Venezuela, the constitutional anti-hate law for peaceful coexistence and tolerance from 2017 imposed penalties of up to 20 years of deprivation of liberty on anyone who promotes war or incites national, racial, ethnic hatred, or of any other nature that constitutes incitement to discrimination, intolerance, or violence. The other way, in Nicaragua, in January 2021, a reform to the Article 37 of its constitution was approved, imposing a life sentence for people who incur hateful, cruel, degrading, humiliating, and inhumane circumstances which, due to their impact, cause shock, rejection, indignation, or disgust in the national community. Although these provisions have a common justification in the defense of nation-state and are duly described in the legal apparatus, the turning point is the autocracy's extensive interpretations of these regulations. Relevant extra legislative mechanisms include persecution and restriction of freedoms of creation, of association, reputation assassination, like death by media, limitations of movement, prohibiting people from leaving their home, traveling to other province, or departing the country, or even prohibiting artists residing abroad from entering the country. Bureaucratic obstructions also, like high taxes, conditioning membership and privileges, delays in certifications, barring from national foundations, and the criminalization or persecution of initiatives that have been supported from abroad. It is about maintaining a formality and legitimacy before constitutional rights, as long as the artists don't represent a threat to the system's survival. In this way, the system ensures their subsistence without drastically losing democratic competitiveness in the eyes of third governments. The subordination of these citizens' rights through the drafting of presidential contraventions, decrees, and challenges gives free rein to those in charge of legal regulations. An example of this arbitrariness that this dichotomy represents is, for example, the prohibition of performance, as well as communal and civic society actions in countries such as Venezuela, Nicaragua, and recently in Cuba. In these countries, the right to protest has been legislated in recent years with the restrictive legal apparatus of the use of public roads associated with national security laws and prohibiting access to areas previously designated by this government. That was, for example, the case of Tattling Whisper from Tania Bruguera in 2014 at the Revolution Square. In December 2020, the Russian State Duma passed a law that allowed the concept of foreign agents to be extended to most associations that were not registered legal entities, as well as to foreign correspondents. The designation would apply to carrying out political activities against the security of the Russian Federation, or from receiving some kind of support from abroad, including financing, property, or organizational assistance. 3 months later, Nicaragua advanced the law for the regulation of foreign agents. In May 2020, the government of Venezuela activated the special automated registry of non-resident, non-governmental organizations, a technological platform created to register and track foreign NGO operating in the country. In Cuba, this stance has taken on importance by associating outsider artists and cultural initiatives with the confrontation and interference of the United States, and was also included in the new penal code. Consequently, conditional financing, the closing off of official channels, and the persecution of other types of assistance articulate new notions by suggesting authorship, intentions, and creative freedom among other cultural activities, especially with a focus on the community. Along these lines, politically critical performance and artists and curators, pronouncements and demands, among myriad other activities, have been criminalized by media outlets. Furthermore, they have motivated the ad hoc rewriting of regulations. For example, after spikes in citizen demonstrations in Nicaragua in 2018, or in Venezuela in 2019, or in Cuba in 2021, their governments approve other specific regulations that criminalize protests. They interpret them as acts of treason and crimes against the Constitution of the Republic, and like them to terrorist acts, undermining sovereignty and self-determination, pro-military intervention, and pro-blockade, as in embargo, and increased sanctions. So the legal bureaucracy at the service of these systems avoids incorporating alternative cultural spaces, since all independent artist activity is already considered unofficial or prohibited, forced to survive in a state of illegality, persecution, and cancellation. The bureaucratic limitations imposed, as well as the advantage that these regulations offer the government, directly affect independent organizations in society, which must compete with the privilege of the official cultural sector, not only in terms of media spaces and resources, but also the legal legitimation itself, which determines whether or not their voices will be heard. The criminal violence that the aforementioned entails allow us to refer to legalized authoritarianism as a non-democratic hybrid regime characterized by manipulating institutions and laws to maintain and concentrate power. It restricts the autonomy of independent cultural institutions and civil society organizations. The rule of law doesn't limit power, but it is its main articulators. Laws, in this case, are instruments to transform repressive and controlling activities into legally justified forms and actions. The state is the legal expression of authoritarian hegemony. So to conclude, the emergence of regimes that appear outwardly democratic regarding culture, but are formally autocratic in practice, reveal space that cannot be observed from the basic tenets of artistic criticism, rather from a sharp lens attuned to political sociology. In this sense, we must rethink the voluntarism of cultural policies in nations such as Cuba, Venezuela, or Nicaragua. This is evident not only from the anachronism of its imaginary repository within revolutionary movements, but also in the impairment of national cultural memory, to the detriment of the Republican heritage, and of course, within the systematic reorganization of increasingly nationalistic, populist, and authoritarian values. Therefore, cultural governance must be understood from its writing as a static element compelled by institutionalization and a participant in the larger regulatory structure, bearing influence not only on artistic and intellectual agency, but also on the civic and academic realms, and also impacting the social imaginary. Lastly, the debate on the subsystems of cultural autonomy not only belongs to space where it is enforced, rather it is in itself a space up for discussion, a space of resistance and of asserting alternative memory, which is necessary for public participation and contribution, an alternative to the old authoritarian model of using public space as the dominant vehicle. The extent to which these patterns are properly differentiated represents a good measure of the democratic health of the culture of these societies. If this dichotomy is not resolved and democratic channels to questioning citizens are increasingly closed, we can expect that mounting social tension will be resolved through social violence and ultimately with big influence in art. So, many thanks. Thank you for listening. I don't know if we can, we have time now for debate if there is any question. This is also very emotional for all of us because as we are speaking, many friends of us, which are also artists, are imprisoned, for example, through these laws, no, during the last 2 years. And it has became a very violent environment to create art, not only in Cuba, but in Nicaragua and Venezuela. Do you? Okay. Ah. You need to turn it on.
¿No está encendido? Sí, sí, lo es. Disculpe que estoy hablando español porque el inglés no me sale tan fluido como a ti. Así que vamos a intentarlo así. Lo que me interesa es por tanto ímpetu que pone el gobierno para controlar la opinión pública y digamos, la conciencia cultural del pueblo. Me parece que es algo muy importante para controlar la sociedad por sí. Y mi pregunta es si ese esfuerzo que pone el gobierno para controlar la opinión del pueblo, si eso no sería en vano, si en realidad ya todo el mundo tiene una opinión totalmente contraria de lo que sea la opinión oficial. Porque así como conozco Cuba, todo el mundo dice frente a un oficial que tenga una opinión que sea deseada, pero detrás de la puerta cerrada habla otra cosa. Y realmente los niños ya empiezan desde chiquito a aplicar ese método, porque ya en la escuela dicen que seremos como el Che y no saben por qué, y no saben qué significa eso, pero lo dicen porque saben que hay que decirlo. Y así todo el mundo actúa en Cuba. Y bueno, ya lo que aprendí de esta situación es que me parece que esos esfuerzos que pone el gobierno para controlar la opinión de la sociedad, eso ya es un tren que se ha ido ya, hace mucho rato, ¿verdad?
Should we translate into English?
Me parece que alguien tiene que traducirlo porque mi inglés no es tan bueno.
Right, so in English for everyone who's listening to the English version, the question was whether all this effort that the government of Cuba in particular puts into controlling public opinion isn't in a sense in vain, because people already have their particular opinion, and this train of controlling opinion, whether it's already passed, and why this whole effort goes into controlling opinion in a sense.
Creo que uno de los principales factores por los que la revolución fue exitosa muchos años fue por presentar ese imaginario cultural común y homogéneo a todos. Este imaginario se ha fragmentado mucho a lo largo de los años. Luis, ¿quieres así simultáneo?
I'll just try with this one. All right. So she's saying one of the reasons why the Cuban Revolution has been so successful, well, in terms of continuity, of just staying in power over time.
Pero inevitablemente cada vez hay menos recursos para legitimar, cada vez hay menos festivales que tengan realmente push, que tengan convocatoria, ¿no? Y hay una fragmentación muy grande, sobre todo con la generación más joven de artistas. La generación de la que Tania Bruguera fue profesora, por ejemplo, a partir de cátedra de conducta, al principio de los años 2000. Ese diálogo se ha hecho cada vez más delgado, más tajante, No obstante, tenemos que pensar más en Cuba no como un territorio de batalla, sino también como una nación que ha visto afectada su patrimonio cultural, al punto de que muchas personas ya no reconocen más en el ámbito cultural lo que puede ser autónomo o lo que es ya preconcebido como políticas estatales y aceptadas como un comportamiento legal, real, ¿no? De eso creo que es lo que más me preocupa en términos de hábito totalitario, cómo las personas, cómo la sociedad en Cuba ha aprendido a asumir todas estas leyes por tantas décadas que lo aceptan y que cada vez es más contrario a la pequeña generación, o sea, la generación más joven. Creo que estamos testimoniando la lucha más radical hoy día, ¿no? Más allá de los 80 y los 90, donde el arte también era muy crítico, pero desde otro punto de vista.
Bueno, all right. So she was saying at the beginning that one of the reasons why there's continuity in power is because of this model of double opinion, of double speak, of self-censorship in the public realm, and that model also has to do with how people behave more, also beyond opinion, so accepted behaviors, which are basically the basis of political action, of any kind of incipient political action, are also self-censored, and the new generation, or every new generation, maybe we can say every new generation, but this one now with access to social media and so on, has a very different upbringing, and it's clashing with that very much. But it's not the same to clash in terms of opinions. The opinions are not what have to be fortified, but this position of actions. What can you do, what can't you do, in that sense.
I don't know if you have a question.
This will be in English, so I'll need your help. Very briefly, in the 1960s and into the 70s, Cuban cultural production was considered the paradigm for revolutionary change from the United States down to Argentina. So what changed in the later years to convert it from revolutionary potential to repressive, anti-revolutionary force that you're describing, the kind of authoritarian force of the 80s, 90s, and forward?
The problem is that I cannot hear very good without the buses. Pero, si me dices un poco. Yo creo que todo imaginario tiene su vida útil. Todo imaginario, también el imaginario de guerrilla, de la revolución. Y ya tan temprano como en el 63, 65, la revolución comenzó a tener grandes encuentros, críticas con intelectuales de América Latina que exponían las bases dictatoriales o autocráticas que venían surgiendo.
So already in the 60s and 63, 65, the leadership of the revolution was starting to, or the process of the revolution was starting to have conflicts with intellectuals, also Latin American intellectuals, that kept growing basically.
Creo que todo discurso autoritario tiene sus límites también, y tan pronto como ya en la década de los 70 y los 80, sin tener Cuba una esfera pública, el arte comenzó a ser la esfera más crítica, la esfera que más contenía o más discutía las políticas del Estado. Y Creo que eso es bastante difícil para un imaginario autoritario que no está acostumbrado a tener canales de diálogo, por lo que yo creo que a partir de los 80, pues mientras más crítico fue el arte cubano, pues menos recursos hubo para dialogar. Se ven movimientos de exilio de los artistas, una persecución más fuerte, cierre de iniciativas, y creo que esto ha tenido pues una consecución más agravada que estamos viendo ahora con el colofón de las leyes, ¿no?
So already in the 80s, the process that's continuing until now is that the civil society institutions, civil society spaces had been reduced so much that art artists find themselves in this very special position of creating spaces that don't exist now, and that also makes art more important, more dangerous for the government since the 80s. And you had new generations of artists in the 80s and the 90s, who started to work with that position. And then, of course, you had, since the 1980s, very systematic processes also of repressing them, the waves of exiled artists, basically, that meddle with the general waves of exile. And the whole infrastructure that we're seeing culminating now is starting to be built to control this haphazard free space that art creates.
Un ejemplo de esta ruptura es el espacio aglutinador de Sandra Ceballos, que podemos ver acá en la exposición, que surgió en ese tiempo, ¿no? Un primer espacio independiente y contestatario. Y otro ejemplo que quisiera traer a colación sería, pues, el diálogo directo que tuvieron no solamente artistas, pero intelectuales, críticos, el 27 de noviembre del año 2020, que de hecho puede ser considerado como uno de los factores antecedentes de la manifestación nacional, las demostraciones que hubo un año después.
So inside, for example, there's artwork by artists who came together in Espacio Aglutinador, which is one space that exists since the 1990s, curated by Sandra Ceballos, as a sort of independent arts gallery, permanent exhibits, but also almost a cultural center for artists to converge. And therein, at the 27th of November in 2020, or a movement was started among very few artists, really, or a few people in the cultural sectors who met in the space. And on that day, they went to the Ministry of Culture and made demands to free an imprisoned musician who was also a member, sort of that group. And this whole process of sort of civic, almost defensive action by artists is one of the main factors that led half a year later to the wider protests in July 21. Yeah.
I think we can continue discussing.
Sound is really weird also.
There.
Bueno, la pregunta ahí en el chat es que si el problema de la Revolución Cubana no es que no fue un evento de la clase obrera en masa, pero un pequeño grupo de guerrillas que hizo la revolución para el pueblo, supuestamente, y entonces que el embargo también ayudó a crear esa cultura paranoide muy...
Sí, bueno,
sí, y que el desarrollo de un movimiento más democrático de masa fue imposible por esa combinación.
Las revoluciones están supuestamente presentadas como movimientos populares y de masas, pero son movimientos de élite, ¿no? Están encabezadas en el caso cubano, por hombres blancos, de alguna manera también que tenían cierto poder territorial y que no entendían la cultura más allá de una cultura popular, masificada y homogénea, ¿no?
So one problem for artists in general since the beginning of the Cuban Revolution was that the leaders who had this very personified hierarchical leadership style, so very little balance of power, in general didn't understand the reasons for why there should be art sort of beyond folk art and beyond popular mass art, Soviet type understanding of art. ¿No?
So, tomar la cultura como este vehículo, como el vehículo de la expresión, de adoctrinamiento, de un discurso que se hizo cada vez más autoritario, no ayudó para nada a un desempeño, un movimiento en la escena nacional que tuviera que ver con más autonomía y más independencia, no solamente en la cultura, sino en la esfera civil. Así que sí, básicamente ya la génesis del movimiento revolucionario no permitía más pluralidad o un ambiente más poroso, ¿no?, en el diálogo de la sociedad cultural o cívica en general con el gobierno.
So this genesis of the movement itself, or of the revolution itself, that still remains until today. In a sense, this whole hierarchical structure, very dynastic in a sense, made it very difficult for the revolution to create this sort of porosity, an interest in creating autonomous spaces. And understanding why. I mean, what are they good for this sort of leadership style, in a sense? No?
I don't know if there another question?
That answered the question, sort of. We can't see anyone, but there is. So there was Noel Douglas. Thank you for your question.
So, thank you very much for listening, for the debate, and I will be around.